Hello, everyone. This is JJ Richa with Fisma Ventures, and today I have with me Jay Cormier. If I said it right, is that right,
That's
Jay?
perfect. Thank you,
Oh
JJ.
my God, that's perfect. Okay, good. And I have Dr. Thomas Lee. Dr. Thomas Lee is also an anesthesiologist, and he is both of them are members of Techos Angels. So I'm gonna let them introduce themselves in a second. But before they do that, I'll tell you a little bit about our program today and what we're doing. So for the past few months, we've been having these fireside chats with really movers and shakers in our community. The importance of this fireside chat is to introduce entrepreneur startups to what it takes to really build a business, start a business, build a business, and potentially grow it and sell it, because that's really the ultimate objective. What we're trying to do today is talk a little bit about a different subject that we haven't talked about, which is life science, medtech, and healthcare, and what it takes for these types of startups to really be able to raise capital and potentially make it in the marketplace. So two experts today, and also Jay promised that since he is also having a startup, he will also answer the question from an entrepreneur standpoint as well. Um, so if you have not subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do. Also, if you have not followed us on social media, please do that as well. Um, we will be on for about an hour. You can start asking your questions from the first minute in your chat box, and we will take on the questions as they come through. Um, all I what I was going to say is about the competition. We have a venture plan competition that we're running. The deadline was yesterday, so if you were planning on signing up, it's too late. But you could still tune in to events about that. So we have a lot of events going on. So hopefully you'll be able to tune in on that. We will be dark in the month of October because we have 22 webinars that are running through. So we won't have a live fireside chat because of that. We have a lot of webinars and a lot of activities going on because of the competition. Just a little bit about Pismo Ventures very quickly. I just want to tell you that we are a virtual incubator. I mean, a virtual incubator or a venture studio also. And we also have a software development arm. So if there's a company, although we are agnostic, if there are companies that are looking to develop custom software, we can help them with that as well. So what we do is we help build businesses. We invest resources, that's both human capital and capital into the companies that are part of our portfolio. We develop software if that's what you need. We also what we do is we trade in some of our services in lieu of equity. We become true partners with our portfolio companies, and therefore helping them not only raise capital but also grow and open doors for them. We are building a fund, and hopefully we will have the fund by the first quarter of next year, and that the fund will also be able to invest in the portfolio companies as well. That's it. So I'll start with Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, please introduce yourself, and then please, Jay, please follow after Dr. Lee is done, and then we can get started with the fireside chat. Thank you
All
for being
right.
here this morning.
Well, thanks for having me. It's quite a pleasure and an honor to be here. I've heard good things about this. So I'm Thomas Lee, as Jay said. I'm a anesthesiologist by trade. I also have the privilege and honor of chairing the Medical Life Sciences Committee for Techos Angels in Orange County. We've seen very robust deal flow since the inception of this about almost 5 years ago. We usually pre-screen about 4 med tech companies and occasionally even more, and then kind of vet those companies and send the more promising ones forward for full screening. Very interested in the tech startup space, and then also myself just starting a med spa and surgery center beginning later this year as well. So really just into the whole innovation standpoint, and just it's always been a joy to see where all this goes. So thanks.
Jay?
Okay, well, I'm Jay Cormier. As JJ mentioned, I do help out at Tech Coast Angels. I help out Dr. Lee on the MedTech committee, although more recently I've been wrapped up in my own startup. And earlier this year, we did close some angel financing before COVID. So again, happy to answer any questions, both from an investor perspective as well as an entrepreneur perspective.
That's really great. Thank you both for being here. So just to update you quickly on the competition on the life science panel, I think we have 20 companies that have just for the life science panel. So we got plenty of companies there. So let's talk a little bit about the life science investing. It seems lately, and the competition kind of proves it too, that there's a lot of activity investing in life sciences, medtech, and healthcare. What are your thoughts? Maybe just tell us about the climate here in Southern California, and maybe connected to maybe nationwide. What are you seeing as far as trends?
You want to start, Thomas?
Yeah, sure. So being in Southern California, especially in Orange County, I mean, it's a real blessing. Orange County is a hotbed, especially for medical devices. And I don't know what the latest numbers are, but at last count, I think there were over 300 medical device companies headquartered here in Orange County, and many of the giants in the field have a very strong presence here, be it Edwards Life Sciences, Massimo, Inmo, the list just goes on and on. So in terms of an atmosphere and a climate and support, it's certainly very, very ideal. Moving further down south to San Diego, there's a strong pharmaceutical bench science presence there. So there's certainly no shortage of expertise and of willingness to support this expertise. Just given just the COVID news that's been in that's been all around, there's a lot of interest always, as there always has been in medtech space as well. So this is a very robust area for life sciences, and we're certainly on the beneficial end of that in terms of all the deal flow that we get, just having the support system and the interest in this to foster the development and push all this forward is certainly a blessing. So.
Yeah, and to add on to that, certainly, as some people may know, Orange County is probably one of the world's epicenters for ophthalmology.
Yeah, that's correct. Yes.
Because, Allergan was founded here and many companies came out of that. So again, Orange County itself is very strong for that. Of course, the Bay Area is also very strong. That's not all that far from Southern California. And of course, we've seen certainly Boston, New York, very big hotbeds, as well as Minneapolis.
Yep. Okay. Ask you, Jay, from an entrepreneur standpoint, how easy is it to raise capital in the life science?
That's a great question. It's never easy to raise capital, right? Everyone tries to make it sound easy. And even when you think you know what you're doing, it's still hard. We were very lucky to, like I said, close around before COVID. And certainly COVID hasn't made things easier as we do more and more virtual events. Nothing wrong with virtual, but of course, investing is often a personal thing, and it's just a little harder to get to know people virtually. Having said that, to Thomas's point, we have a very robust investment community here, both in Orange County, San Diego, and of course in the Bay Area. So I would say from my personal standpoint is, like always, you have to keep at it. The amount of meetings I went to was, countless. We were fortunate to get funding from Tech Coast in San Diego, actually, as well as Orange County, and the Bay Area and New York. But it took a whole lot of travel and talking to get there.
Yeah, I think you also have to keep in mind that if you're starting a medtech or a life sciences company, there's a gauntlet to run through, and there's a lot of added obstacles that you have to get through that you normally wouldn't have to in, say, just your plain consumer goods. I mean, there's FDA clearance that often scares a lot of investors away. That can be a main hurdle, as well as just the whole science and technology behind this. Keep in mind, you're usually pitching to people who don't have a science or technology background, and they're not going to invest in anything that they don't understand. So there's the challenge of making that clear to them, both getting them to understand what you're offering, where the market really is, because it's hard to assess that if you're not in the field. So yes, the returns on medtech companies are usually higher, but also, as Jay's experienced firsthand, just getting through all that is much, much more difficult than your average consumer goods or service.
Well, the risk is higher, and that's why also the returns are higher, right? So
Right.
potentially. So any from your I guess perspective, any major differences when it comes to raising capital from, say, the Southern California region versus someone in New York or Boston or maybe Northern California? Thomas, any experience there?
Yeah, I think it helps to be local. I mean, you definitely don't want to ever discount the connections and just the that you have. If you start in Orange County, well, then your network is certainly stronger, and you're able to call on more resources. For example, the UCI Applied Innovation is fantastic in terms of plugging you in. And you don't kind of see this in areas that outside of the Bay Area or New York, where there isn't that high tech medical technology atmosphere and the environment to support it. So it definitely helps to be, and we've seen this happen too. MedTech companies who start somewhere else in the nation will want to relocate to Orange County to tap into all those benefits as well. And we certainly see that a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Jay, in your situation, what are specifically from an investor standpoint, what are the life sciences or healthcare or medtech areas you're most interested in?
Well, for me, of course, maybe I break it down to three broad areas, but again, this is a very high level. Certainly, you always got those pharmaceuticals and biologics, medical devices, as Thomas said. And then, the one I'm more interested in these days is kind of what I'd call the digital health area, really bringing together or overlapping that medical and technology, and really coming up with maybe innovative ways, or just maybe sometimes non-conventional ways to attack the same problems.
Yeah. How about you, Thomas?
Yeah. So if you're looking at traditionally what's been the best returns and what's been the most straightforward and best medical technology fields to get into, we're looking at ophthalmology, as Jay said. And there's medical reasons and technical reasons why these are better. Cardiology has also always been very hot, just because of a lot of the demand for the services. We are seeing a lot of good stuff in aesthetics as well. Just given the payer model of that's actually one of the more innovative areas in medicine that's happening right now. What's fallen off a little bit, stem cells, just with the that used to be a fairly hot area, but the FDA crackdown on that has kind of soured a lot of people with that. There used to be a lot of interest in blockchain as well, but I haven't seen much in the past few months with that. I think they had a hard time kind of adapting, finding uses in the medical field for blockchain technology. AI is continues to be pretty big, and as Jay mentioned, just digital applications of and ways to facilitate patient care using digital technology is pretty hot. I will say that in the field of pharmaceuticals, these tend not to be angel level type investors, just because of the level of dilution on down the field, and the FDA hurdle which these companies have to cross is just so overbearing that it's usually not worth angel level risks with that. So we've had very, very, very few companies succeed that are pharmaceutical based. But so.
Yeah,
That's
so
interesting.
Thomas, you brought up aesthetics, which I think is a great tangent. Maybe before JJ asks another question, I'll bring us into the weeds. Is, of course, Orange County, again, big on aesthetics because of Allergan and
Right.
Botox. But I think from a investor standpoint, one of the things that makes it interesting is it's very often a consumer payable. You don't
right.
have to go through and run the reimbursement gauntlet, which
That's exactly right.
is another thing that I thought maybe we could chat a little bit further about before we went to the next topic.
Right, and you've touched on Allergan, which is huge into aesthetics, both with their cool sculpting, cool tone machines. Botox is from them. They've got a bunch of dermal fillers as well. interesting. It was an ophthalmologist that kind of brought us to a lot of the aesthetic applications for ocular issues. And it's a great field in that, this is all cash based, and it's something that's extremely in demand. It never ceases to amaze me what people will pay for aesthetic services. When I was I have a funny story. I was working with an ENT doctor one time, and he was just kind of shaking his head. He was transitioning into aesthetics, and he says, I can say I can do a 6-hour, 8-hour operation to save a person's life, and that patient will fight me for a $50 copay. I can tell them I can make your nose look better, and they will throw $10,000 at me without blinking an eye. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of just the of just the demand for this, and the med spa industry and the whole aesthetic industry is just booming. And we're fortunate to be in a situation where we mentioned Allergan InMode, which makes a lot of the radio frequency devices, is based here, and so still a lot of room to grow in that. And we always like it because it's a fairly straightforward FDA pathway. There's tried and true modalities as well. So
the other place we see it sometimes is in ophthalmology when someone's getting cataract surgery. But if they want a multifocal intraocular lens,
exactly.
That's pocket. And again, that can be $5,000-$6,000 easy, and it runs anywhere from 20 to 50% of the people are paying for that upgrade out of their pocket.
Right. Yeah. Just look at the whole LASIK industry as well. I mean, that was it continues to boom. I mean, so.
Wow, that's so. I want to go back a little bit to the digital health and maybe digital therapeutics. That seems to be, growing, a lot of interest in that area. So maybe Jay, you could expand on that a little bit. What are you seeing? What is it? Why is there so much interest?
Right. Well, so I think one of the things it does do, or at least I hope it does, is democratize medicine a little bit, right? By putting someone's health maybe a little more in their control. Some of this certainly are therapies that do require FDA approval, but sometimes it doesn't, right? And so that's something that may be information for that patient so they can take better action on their own. So of course you got to be careful of that line, what's a therapy and what's not a therapy, but I still put them in the sort of digital health category because it can help someone's health. And I think we do see, as healthcare certainly continues to be more expensive, people starting to get used to trying to take a little more active role in their own health.
And just to talk about that just one more minute, and is digital therapeutics specifically related to maybe helping people with their stress level and things like that? Is that what this is?
I mean, that's one of them. Certainly, you see digital therapeutics helping people with any kind of disorder, including opioid disorders, eating disorders, you name it. We see it, of course, in eye care. It's, I would say, all over the map. I think it's a very broad range.
Okay.
Yeah, we've seen a huge spike in the number of digital health companies coming to us. I think it's part of the age we're living in, and everybody's carrying around a computer with their smartphone and trying to streamline access to care and give recommendations, trying to empower people to take responsibility for their own care. We just screened a company last month using distraction type gaming on a mobile platform for PTSD and just relaxation therapy. A lot of the science behind this hasn't really been proven out as to the efficacy of this, but I think that's coming as well. So I think you're seeing a marriage between current technology and trying to find applications in medicine to make things easier. So.
All right. So talking about that, and maybe talking about the pandemic, how have you seen any interesting companies addressing COVID during this past 6 months?
Yes. What we've actually seen is a lot of companies trying to pivot into COVID. They've got some piece of technology that they think might be applicable and help to COVID, it usually never works because it's usually kind of a stretch from what their core competency is. But I can give you a few examples. There was a company treating just basic acute respiratory distress syndrome, and they had a very good application for it. And then they were just trying to market it and shift it. And a lot of this is just to try and get angel investment by saying, hey, look, we are this will help COVID, but you have to realize by the time all this comes to fruition, a vaccine will probably be out, and that application may not be relevant anymore. But we are looking at the core application to fix problems that'll still be present after COVID. There was the respiratory sensor that we were looking at had some COVID applications, but again, that was a little bit outside of their game plan and their core specialty. But as long as the application still has relevance after the COVID crisis is over, then that's a company that we can look very strongly at. I saw some also on the funding side. I saw some initial pullback in funding just in the first few months of it, but now it's almost a non-factor, and things are relatively back to normal in terms of people loosening up the purse strings and willing to put money into med tech ventures.
Yeah.
Had in particular, but certainly the one that I think has future applicability and probably is a little bit buried now is things addressing anxiety. I think there's a lot of people, stuck at home wondering what the future looks like.
Yeah. Jay, what about the telehealth and this COVID? Have you seen on your side companies really they're growing? A lot of people are looking for telehealth type solutions. Have you seen some new innovative solutions in that area?
Well, so I'd put it into two categories. One, like Thomas said, I think we see a lot of people trying to pivot into telehealth because it sounds good. Certainly we work on an augmented reality, so that sounds like maybe that's applicable. But the companies I think that are really doing well are the ones that were already addressing telehealth, had a beachhead, and this really accelerated it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's switch a little bit to talk about, because I think a lot of the people that are listening, they want to know really what do you look for specifically when you're looking to invest into a life science type company, because it is different than a regular software company or a product or a consumer product or a drink or whatever. So do you have a specific set of parameters that you look for when you're looking at investing?
Yeah, that's a great question, and if you carry one thing away from this is to keep these points in mind. So first and foremost, we look at clinical relevance. Is there really a need for this? And this, believe it or not, is something that is not we run into a lot. And that can be for a variety of reasons. Some people will, and I personally hate seeing this, some people will have some kind of technical solution, and then they'll work backwards to try and find a problem that really isn't there. So not only clinical relevance, it has to have very impactful, almost game-changing clinical relevance. You change the color of a suture thread, that's not gonna be that big a deal. But really hammering down and saying, yes, there really is a need for this. There really is a big market need for this is important. Also, we look for kind of a diverse, experienced team with this. The team is always important. You want people, both on the clinical side and on the business side who have had experience carrying through medical technology companies, because it is very uncharted waters out there, and trying to find somebody that's been there, done that, and has had a successful track record in doing that is very important. We look at the intellectual property as well. I mean, this is very important to be able to defend what you have, and in several cases, when you go to exit the company, the IP is what's carrying the value of the sale. The big bugaboo is also the FDA regulatory pathway. I mean, the more simple, the more straightforward your pathway, the much better chance you have of getting funding. Time is risk, and the last thing anybody wants to do is get mired down in a long FDA pathway and then burn through all your money and the whole company collapses. As a result of this, for better or for worse, we usually like to look at 510K devices or devices that have a solid predicate that'll get you through the FDA clearance pathway a lot faster. And one of the last things that's also very critical is valuation. We are seeing to our dismay, valuations that are just completely too high and too unreasonable for the stage that you're at, for the product that you're selling. Once you cross north of 6 or 7, boy, you really better be in revenue or have something, because it's all a spectrum depending on where you are and then what you're offering. But we found that the medtech companies that get successfully funded the most usually have valuations under 5. And that can be a showstopper a lot of times as well. So,
Jay, what are your thoughts?
So to pile on and some reinforcement there, certainly, the business case has to be there. So assuming the business case is there and there's a strong value proposition, I put it into 3 buckets for life sciences. One, regulatory. So as Thomas talked about, the FDA approval cycle. If that's a long one, a risky one, I'm not sure that's a good angel investment. Reimbursement is a big one, right? People assume that just because they get FDA approval, that automatically they can get reimbursement. And that is just not the case. So if you're not a direct consumer payable, you better have a very strong reimbursement strategy. And then, of course, similar to the IP, I would call it moats. IP is certainly one of the moats, but you need a very strong moat that's going to stand the test of time because of those first 2 R's, regulatory and reimbursement. You better have something to protect you through that long process.
Yeah, let me also add adoption as well. I mean, getting clinicians to adopt to a new technology is exceedingly difficult. I mean, I always like to say that, an inferior technology or process of doing something in the hands of someone who's experienced and very well versed in doing that is better than a newfound technology that, while it may be simpler, but if they're not comfortable using it, they're not going to use it. And I can, the example I always like to cite is back in the height of the AIDS pandemic, they were coming out with all these IVs that were technically, clinically superior. They were protective. Either they would somehow shield the needle once you put it in. And I loved using them, but none of my attendings at the time didn't want to use it. They were just used to using the old IVs, and they were stuck using that, even though we had a better IV out now. So so something that's even very simple and can be of obvious benefit, you can have a very hard hurdle trying to cross to get adoption. So that has to be factored in. How easy is it to streamline this into the current workflow of practice? So.
That's kind of interesting because one of the biggest things that in any type of companies that is trying to raise capital, we ask them is how you're going to reach your target customer. So especially if you're targeting potentially what you're talking about, Dr. Lee, is trying to reach a doctor to use a specific needle or whatever. How can someone reach someone like you? Because you're hard to reach, you're hard to convince, you're used to the old way of doing things. How easy is it for someone to reach the medical community in general?
Well, it's not easy, but I think for all intents and purposes, this is still a very relationship-based business to almost to the max. I mean, if as a colleague you come up and tell another fellow physician of yours, hey, this is really neat, you want to take a look at it, that carries much, much, much more weight than 1,000 reps being thrown at it trying to sell you on something. So I think a lot of this is just getting, plugging into TCA and plugging into good clinicians that are plugged in. And once you get that initial traction that they can, and within their colleagues, that they see that, hey, this is actually a device that has some benefits, it becomes much easier to gain adoption, because once clinicians see that other clinicians are using it, you need to get good peer-reviewed papers, good studies. I mean, that's another way. I mean, that's the importance of arranging your clinical data and your studies to show that, hey, this objectively is of benefit. And I think you start to build traction that way. I think it's important to develop good relationships with clinicians. And it's one of the things we look at. I mean, how plugged in are these people? Key opinion leaders, getting key opinion leaders on your side, well-known orthopedic surgeons or ophthalmologists. I know this has been frequently seen in ophthalmology. It's one of the things we look at. Who is on your board? And it goes with the team. I mean, this is a key opinion leader. If they say, and if they back this, then there's something there. We had a company, a company called Insight. They were working with augmented reality to assist in placement of orthopedic instrumentation. And what we were most impressed was their board. It was like almost a lot of well-known orthopedic surgeons. We had 20 orthopedic surgeons that actually invested in it. So yes, from a clinical validation standpoint, we had no problem with that. So a lot of it is about building relationships, getting those key objective studies in, hooking up with key opinion leaders on your board. So that's the initial step.
All right, that's great. Jay, this is always a difficult thing for me. I'm happy you answered the question, because it's always hard to, because it's built on relationships. It's always hard to penetrate the market. Like you said, if your friend tells you got to look at it, you'll look at it. But if a rep comes, it's a different message. Jay, on your side, a question on more specifically, have you been seeing anything that's been hot in the medical technology area that's been receiving funding lately?
Well, again, I've been a little more focused on the entrepreneurial side these days. Like I think you guys mentioned, telehealth and COVID's first on everyone's mind, right? I certainly see things getting funded there that, maybe wouldn't normally. But I think it comes back to the digital health, is since people are tending to be, let's call it shut in, although certainly I think things are starting to reopen. Anything that's you can put in their hands that they can self-monitor more. I think we did see a big problem in the pandemic. Hopefully it's getting better, where people weren't necessarily seeking medical help when they should have been, right? And anything that helps put that in their hands, I think is getting some traction. But of course, to Thomas's point, you got to show the efficacy. You got to have some believers. If you don't have a strong advisory board that is going to back you and hopefully have already invested in you, then all the great ideas don't go too far. It is a relationship business.
All right. Let me ask you this, and I'll ask the same question to Dr. Lee as well. In what you've seen as an entrepreneur and also as an investor, what are some of the mistakes or pitfalls that life science companies, medtech companies are really falling into?
Right. Well, so I think, Thomas already mentioned number one, right, which is go out too early with too high a valuation and think that, just because you're attacking a huge market, that somehow that justifies it. What we certainly have learned, being an investor, but also being on the entrepreneur side, is it's really about traction. And traction can come in many different forms. The sooner you can get that traction, the better. And traction is clinical studies is traction, showing efficacy, but actually being able to show the benefit in users and in patients is huge traction. So it doesn't always have to be revenue traction. It can be maybe early animal studies or something like that. But there's got to be some traction, and the more traction, traction and milestones is what drives valuation.
Okay. Dr. Lee, pitfalls?
I mean, I'll echo what Jay said too, because once some people see that a core group of people they trust in, again, goes back to the relationship, and with expertise in this field are investing, it really snowballs. I mean, we're seeing that with the Makani sensor that we just recently got a term sheet on, and is probably going to do very, very well in terms of its funding. Other things, I'll emphasize again the too high evaluation. That's a real deal killer. A lot of that also goes along with people thinking that their idea is unique. I've seldom seen any med tech company with a truly unique idea. There's always, and one of the things I really hate to see is when people say we have no competition. I mean, I've yet to see a company have that. It may not be directly within the exact same technology you have, but there are people working on the same thing from a different angle, from a different way in, that there's always present as well. We also see companies usually underestimate the regulatory pathway that this is going to take. We see time and time again people saying, it's only going to take a few months, but then we have FDA experts on our board saying, no, this is going to take a lot longer. They almost also invariably estimate the amount of time and money that they need that's going to be required to push this thing all the way through. And then again, I go back to the device with no real clinical relevance. I mean, those are kind of the real stumbling blocks that we see in a lot of the startups that we screen. So,
Yeah, Jay, let's talk a little bit about the team for a life science type company. Most of the life science type companies that I've been seeing lately is that they were started by either a medical doctor or maybe a PhD or a scientist. Um, but most of the time, I see that they don't have the right skills in order to really run a company that they're starting. From an entrepreneur standpoint, what do you think it takes to run a life science type company?
Yeah. Well, certainly, the doctors are a great start, and hopefully they're in touch with their patients so they know the clinical relevance. To Thomas's point, but you also need a business person, right? Because just because something is clinically relevant doesn't mean you can get traction. And then, of course, you need the team that can. It comes back to milestones, right? That can technically execute. And, just because there's clinical relevance and there's a great idea doesn't mean you can execute on that. And if you believe what Thomas says, and I certainly do, because I've seen competition come out of the woodwork over, the course of our venture, is that it's all about execution, right? And so other people are probably out there with similar ideas, maybe taking different approaches. And in the end, you got to be able to out-execute your competition to realize the dream, if you will. And so you need that well-rounded team. You need them to complement each other. You can start with an idea and a doctor, but I think you got to grow beyond that pretty quickly to justify the investment.
So, okay. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough how much this is a well-rounded team effort to getting this through, and we see it both ways, both your way in terms of a physician founder that has no business experience versus someone that did a patent search online and then just tried to start a company with it. And we've seen teams fall apart, missing elements. I mean, I think you need somebody in finance, somebody in marketing, a CEO that really understands what it's going to take to get this company from point A to the exit. You need a good medical advisory board as well, a good IP attorney on your team. I mean, those are some of the things that really construct a well-rounded team that we really emphasize and really look at. So.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the areas that I've looked, I haven't done a lot of life science investments per se, but every time I look into those, it's usually area mentioned that are mostly lack, and specifically more the execution side of it. What does TCA Orange County have a specific process that we look at when it comes to investing specifically in life science companies, or basically mostly the areas that you discussed earlier, Dr. Lee?
Can you were glitching in and out there? The first half of the question was.
I'll repeat. Does TCA have specific process specifically for funding life science companies, other than what you mentioned earlier?
Right. So we have when you apply to TCA, there's essentially two tracks. There's a medical life sciences tracks, and then there's a general track. So when you apply, and I'll take an initial look at the application, assuming there's really no obvious red flags, you actually go to a specific medical life sciences pre-screen committee, and which is comprised of people like Jay and other medical life sciences experts, not just from the clinical side, but from almost every aspect of the med tech startup process. And you give a pitch to us, and then we kind of evaluate your company just based on all we've talked about. And then we take a vote to see if this company is worthy enough, has enough promise to send you on to the full screening. And then those companies that make it, and right now it's probably running about 50% of the companies that we see about 4 a month that'll get pushed forward into the full screening. And then JJ, as you know, they'll screen to the full screening committee, and then we'll take a vote as to whether there's enough interest to push this on to due diligence, or whether the the fund is interested enough. And a lot of this goes down to, I think there's a few key opinion leaders within the TCA screening that everybody kind of looks at to say, all right, is this a valid enough reason to get
Right.
it through? So
Mainly looking at you guys. So
yeah, so yeah, for better for worse, and that's kind of the process in a nutshell. So.
all right.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of different processes across the country after talking to a lot of the different angel groups. I wouldn't say there's any one tried or true. I like what we do here in TCA Orange County, obviously, and then of course you get screened against all the other companies that might have completely different business models or backgrounds. There are dedicated angel groups focused on life science, like Mass MedTech Angels, Life Science Angels in the Bay Area, that only see life science type companies. So it just depends very much on the group, I think.
Yeah, it does. Okay, let's. I wanted to ask you a little bit, Jay, about maybe tell us a little bit about Idaptic, your company. And then
Sure.
maybe Thomas, maybe you could tell us after that, maybe the new incubator that you're doing with some of the other angels as well.
Okay, so I don't want to turn this into a commercial, but you asked, so I will. Idaptic is an augmented reality visual aid company. By using image enhancing software and machine learning algorithms, we try to create a more natural viewing experience for people with macular degeneration. And of course, that's over 150 million people worldwide and one of the biggest unmet needs in eye care today.
Wow. And so, and you told me you raised some money in January, February, which is a good time to do that just before. And are you looking? I'm sorry, say that again.
Perhaps because of COVID, we dodged a bullet.
You dodged a bullet. So for a company like yours, just kind of educate the listeners, how much do you think it will take an additional capital in order to get to an exit?
Right. So I guess I should make one very important point. We talked about regulatory reimbursement and moats. Fortunately, we're an FDA Class 1 exempt device, so we do not need FDA approval. So that's a major, I would say, cost and time savings there. And also, similar to the hearing aid model, this is a direct consumer payable. So we don't have to go get reimbursement approval. On one hand, maybe that makes it more difficult for people to pay for, but of course, hearing aids is a $6 billion market, so we figure that's a pretty safe bet as well. So that right there makes it very easy to run a leaner operation. So I think, we're looking eventually for another 2 million to probably get to that exit point, which I think is extremely modest for most life science companies.
That is quite modest. All right. So, Dr. Lee, what about, we talked a little bit about the incubator. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
All right. So there's this a new medtech accelerator incubator. It's called COA, KOA, COA Accelerator. It was actually founded by Francis Duhay, Dr. Francis Duhay, who's been kind of a giant in the field in Orange County's successfully. It was the former chief medical officer of Edwards Life Sciences, and it was instrumental in getting the transcatheter heart valves into the market. And Ray Chan, who's also a member of TCA Orange County, kind of handling the financing side of that organization. What it is it's a soup to nuts accelerator specifically built to tackle a lot of the issues that we've raised on this whole medtech front. And they've assembled like a very impressive world-class team of experts in all the buckets that you would need to carry a medtech company through to a successful exit. And very excited to be a part of it. It's almost like they have the C chart to help you navigate through this uncharted waters of all medtech companies. And they have all the experts in place that we've talked about. There's IP attorneys, the FDA experts, marketing experts, clinicians, scientists, and it greatly aids and facilitates in getting everything through in a very timely, efficient manner. The first company that's come out of there is called Makani. It's a wireless respiratory sensor, and they just they pitched to us a few months ago, went through due diligence, got got a resounding response from not only within TCA but other angel groups as well. And the term sheet has been finalized, and we're in the process of funding it. So very excited about just the whole COA model, greatly aiding and facilitating getting medtech companies through all these obstacles that they have to run through. And there are 2 or 3 other companies within the accelerator right now.
So as an accelerator, the accelerators have different models. Are you providing resources? Are you providing connections? What is it? Are you also investing in them, and how much?
Right. So it's all 3 of the things that you've mentioned. Connections abound, just given what they're called value creation providers, for which I'm one of them. And there's a lot of clinicians and people with deep connections within the field in all the areas that we talked about. There's also a separate venture fund called the COA Venture Fund, and COA's money itself is put initially into these startup companies as well. And then the resources, I said, it's mainly the manpower resources. There's manufacturing connections that they have as well to help you build prototypes and whatnot. So
that's really good. As a when you have an accelerator, an incubator, and I was going to ask you really about the investment. Is there a dollar amount that you invest into these companies? That's what I want to ask. And then at a specific, like a Y Combinator, they have a dollar amount and they take a percentage. Do you do that as well?
Yeah, so they usually put about $100,000 to $250,000 initially into the company. What it was really geared for too is the situation where you have a PhD who comes up with a great idea but has absolutely no idea how to form a company and get it through. So what COA would do in that situation would be to take a large percentage of the company and then build the company around them, and then compensate the founder in various other ways. So yeah, in a way they would kind of take over all the business and marketing and pushing forward and development of the product as well. So
well, yeah, I didn't know that. So they're taking on a lot more than I thought. So you're taking on
it's almost they started with the idea. I mean, if you just have a great idea, I mean, that is the earliest stage that they would start looking at a company. So
okay, all right. So back to you, Jay. Talking about the pandemic, what do you think companies should do? I know we talked about they pivot from maybe they're doing something to something else, but what should they do? Should they just wait it out before they start going out to raise capital, or maybe you think they should completely pivot their idea to be some other to go for some other target market, or the option would be to really go for it and raise as much capital as they can right now. What are your thoughts or recommendations?
Well, that's a fantastic question. Certainly, we went through a lot of these options ourselves, and of course, the first thing you always do is try to make sure you optimize cash flow, right? Because first of all, if you don't have the runway, all the pivoting in the world isn't going to get you there, right? So that's always, I would say, the first step. And then, you got to have a very clear view of where that runway will get you and how long it's going to get you. So that's kind of the triage, I'll call it. I certainly saw a number of companies, as Thomas mentioned, starting to pivot. And the pivoting was almost like a knee-jerk reaction to, we got to do something, so let's pivot, because all successful startups pivot. And, I think that's very good advice at a high level, but I think you really got to analyze your market. In our case, we decided not to pivot because A, we had the runway, and B, what I saw some competitors pivoting into, I don't think made a lot of sense. But I was happy to have less competition because they were too busy pivoting, right? So So then I think, you have to take that third step, which is, okay, if you still believe that what you have is a viable business in the short, medium, and long term, then how do you optimize what you have left? And so then I think you have to kind of segment your market, right? And say, is there segments of that market that will get traction sooner or will get traction during, a shutdown? Really focus, and I mean laser focus, on those areas that you think can come out of this first and will be the most productive. And I think this is, a very hard decision, but it's a great one for a lot of startups to really help sharpen their view and sharpen their focus and really focus and prioritize on what's most important. For us, we're fortunate to be fairly consumer facing. So we certainly refocused on a lot of direct to consumer marketing. So we could still reach those consumers, even if they weren't out there visiting their eye care providers. And then, the other thing we did that I think is part of that analysis is, are you really positioned for when things improve? So not only did you focus on your most important segments, but you can come out of that strong on the other side. And again, strip back the resources and focus on the things that's going to get you out of it fastest. For us, it was some new product development. Depends on the area, depends on the company, depends on what their major value proposition is. But it's all about, if I haven't said it enough already, focus.
Focus and runway, cash for the runway, right?
Yes, exactly.
So this may not be a question, but I thought maybe it would be, give us an idea. But do you look at a specific maybe profit margin, gross profit margin, when you're looking at maybe a medtech company, or because of the initial risk that's involved, everybody's like looking for a huge exit at the end, or are you looking at the actual model and how much you're selling a good or a service, and how much, what's their gross profit margin along the way, in order for you to say, it looks like it's really good? Is there any specific thing that's related mostly to medtech health?
You want me to take a crack at that first?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So when I think about gross margin, and it's not just even for life science, I also have a long technology background. I think Thomas mentioned it earlier. You're looking for what's the valuation is going to be. What's that exit look like? And I've looked at this for a long time across many industries, and I'm absolutely convinced that valuation is heavily tied to gross margin. So if you don't have a business model that's going to support a higher gross margin, you better really, set your sights a lot lower. So it is about the moats, as we talked about. But of course, a moat is one of those things. Regulatory is a moat as well that helps or should help increase gross margin, right? And so I won't say it's all about gross margin, because if you have really high gross margin going after a small market, I'm not sure that's going to get you anywhere.
Right.
But I think if you've got a value proposition that sets you apart, there ought to be a gross margin that matches up with that.
Right. I think the exit's also a very, very personal opinion decision. I mean, I think all throughout our organization, you'll have people that are willing to, hang in there a little longer, given that there's a bigger multiple at the end, versus some people that will maybe just want an earlier exit, but accept a lower multiple. So I think that factors in as well. We usually like to see, from what I've seen in the medtech space, about a 20x return in 5 years. That's kind of our baseline, and that's certainly not universal. Everybody has their own preference with that, and then you kind of work backwards based on that. And then, of course, what's factoring in there is how realistic and how soon can this company exit. Because we see, for example, definitely in the pharmaceutical space, they know that to get it all the way to an exit, it's going to be far too excessive and will be diluted out from the early stages. But while they try to sell it as, well, after this study, then we can exit you with this multiple. And that'll only take, quote unquote, 1 or 2 years. Well, that's up to you to determine whether that's a realistic projection to make, and whether that multiple that they're offering is acceptable to you. So I mean, it ties into gross margin, but in many ways, it's a choice of the investor looking at the time risk ratio and then your reward for how you want to exit. And in the medtech space, yes, you usually do get a higher multiple on exit, but invariably it'll take a lot longer than you think it will, and it's a high risk, high reward system. So.
All right.
No, and I think pharma seldom discusses gross margin because pharma is always a high gross margin, but the exit comes before you ever get into the market. So gross margin's a little bit of a, it's not that it's not important. I just don't think it gets discussed as much in terms of pharma. Is that a fair statement, Thomas?
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I agree, and that's why I was like hesitant asking the question specifically on gross margin.
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Yeah, no, because usually, like, if you're talking software, if you don't see 80-90% gross profit margin, then that company is probably not going to succeed because you're not selling it right. There's a lot of things that go there. But on the medtech, looking for 50%, 60%, or we're also looking for 80-90%. That's maybe a Jay question.
Well, of course, I still want to see 80 or 90%, but if we again strip it back, maybe digital health falls more into the software area.
Right.
Pharmaceutical, something different. I think med device, it's a little harder to get to those 80 to 90%. But I would think, and Thomas, I'm just going to throw out some numbers. I would think we want to still be seeing high 60, 70% plus. Is that a fair?
Right. And a lot of that has to do with the volume too, and the demand. I mean, whether your device is a one-off device that every hospital needs, but will almost seldom never use, versus something that's cheap and you can sell a ton of, and that goes back into the clinical applications of what your device is.
Right,
so.
and the razor blade model too. If there is
exactly.
That you're selling along with it, disposable stuff. Yeah, I just wanted to get an idea and give the audience an idea because, in any business, if you start going below that 50%, it becomes really hard to scale the company. So I think we're almost done. When we're having fun, time goes by. So I'm just going to do a little bit of closing. I'll come back to you and ask you both to give me one recommendation each on what you a life science company, medtech, healthcare company should really do in order to be able to raise capital, or maybe to make their company grow better, faster. So I'll be right back. I'll do a couple seconds of closing here. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I wanted to say that this program will be available by tomorrow morning on YouTube. Will be available on the YouTube channel. It would be youtube.com/FismaVentures. Also, again, if you have not subscribed to the channel, please do, and follow us on social media. I will repeat by saying that we are going to go dark with the live fireside chat for the month of October, just because there's a lot of activities going on due to the competition, the business plan competition we're running. So there's 22 webinars. There are 4 this week, every day this week. I bet you guys didn't know that, but there's 4 this week, and there's at least 3 every week throughout October. Thank you for being here. And Jay, tell us, what's your recommendation?
Strong team and advisory board. If you can't convince some of the leaders in the industry up front that your idea has merit, then you've got a long road ahead of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Lee?
Yeah. Aside from the team, clinical relevance, reasonable valuation, good, strong intellectual property, and a well-defined FDA clearance pathway. So,
all right. Well, thank you both very much. This has been very insightful for everyone. I'm sure it was for me, and I really appreciate your being here. And I'm sure I will see you on the judging panel the next few weeks. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, JJ.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Thanks. All right.